Hello, heroes. You are too late. I'm Antonio D'Amico, this is Pointy Hat, and welcome to Tip of the Hat. That's right, it's the other one. In this series, I give D&D advice about whatever I feel like I can give advice about. It could be DMing tips, a new thing to incorporate into your game, or how to make a villain. That's right, we're talking about villains today, specifically how to make a good villain for your D&D campaign. So first up, what's a villain? A villain is, well, a villain. The character that plays the role of the bad guy in a story. We've kind of gone into this before in my video about making D&D rivals for your characters. Go watch that, please. But villain is a type of antagonist. An antagonist is a role in the plot. They are an obstacle for the protagonist to overcome. Not all antagonists are villains, but villains are antagonists. Now, before the actuallys in the comments come out in full force, a villain can technically not be an antagonist. You could have a villain protagonist, but for all intents and purposes, especially the purposes of this video, villains are antagonists. So what's the difference? Well, before I tell you all about it, let's talk about gods for a second. Gods may be all-powerful, but they are not above getting bored, and mortals are never more at danger of their meddling than when they are. They say that to settle disputes, avoid conflict, or even just to kill time, gods will play games, and they'll use the living as their pawns. Heroes might believe they are the ones deciding to go into a mysterious dungeon to rid it of the evil beast lurking within, when in reality, their free will is just the influence of an all-powerful god playing the side of the heroes. Conversely, those that humans and other civilized races called monsters might choose to defend their home from intruders that use the title of adventurers to do as they please in the monster's own home. But the monsters are also pawns of the god that is playing against the god that controls the heroes. It's a callous, cruel game, but it does sound fun. Would you like to try yourself? Well, you don't have to be a god to do so. You can do so right now, because Art of the Genre and Lazy Squire are making it possible with the Legend of Keepers 5e Reverse Dungeon Kickstarter. This is an entire 350 plus page campaign book that you can play from the perspective of the heroes, delving deep into 4 complete dungeons for treasure and glory, or from the perspective of the monsters that are trying to defend those dungeons from those pesky intruders that call themselves heroes. I think this is a sick concept, and Art of the Genre is including in their book everything you need to make it happen. There are 4 full dungeons, like I said, but also 24 playable heroes, more than 50 playable monsters, and 12 boss monsters that you can fight against or embody yourself. The whole book is based on the video game of the same name, so you can check that out too if you want. But the true jewel here are the minis. Oh, the minis. They were sculpted by Lazy Squire Games, and there are over 100 of these. Yep, over 100 minis made specifically for Legends of the Keepers, but that can of course be used for any game you want, and they are delivering them extremely early. I'm talking 1 month after the Kickstarter campaign ends. And speaking of, if all of this sounds interesting to you, and the visuals I've been bombarding your screen with look like something you would like to check out, well, go ahead and do that. The Kickstarter is live right now. It just went live like a couple of days ago, and you can find it in the description of this very video. Thank you so much for the sponsor. Okay, so what's a villain? Well, a villain is more of a character archetype. A villain is a character whose evil actions directly challenge the protagonist. And if this sounds overly reductive to you, it's time to take a step back and realize that the point of a definition is to have common ground to stand on when discussing a particular topic. If we were to try to encompass every single possible exception to this, our definition would just be a villain is a character. And something tells me that would not be very helpful. Yes, a character can have a sad backstory with violence playing in the background that explains why they're doing evil things. Like, I don't know, just spitballing here. They hate dogs because a dog killed their mom. And yep, survey shows that that's still a villain. A villain can be redeemed, at which point they are no longer a villain. A villain can do evil things because they believe that the outcome is more important and they believe that outcome to be good. All those things do not disqualify the character from being a villain. Cool, so we know that a villain is a character whose evil, dastardly deeds are the source of the protagonist's conflict, and that puts them in direct opposition to the protagonist, or the protagonists, when talking about D&D. So why would we need a villain? This is honestly a fantastic question to ask yourself, because here's the kicker, you don't! Plenty of stories, specifically plenty of great D&D campaigns, do not have villains at all. I've run several campaigns without any villains. I've seen or read or played several great stories that did not have one either. A campaign could be about stopping a thing from happening or ensuring that a thing does indeed happen and there's no evil character twirling their mustache behind the scenes trying to make sure the bad happens. This is completely fine. So what's the point of adding a villain? Well, because of what a villain themselves can add to your campaign. First off, villains are active. They drive the plot forward. They have plans and needs to make those plans happen. So they are agents in the story and make decisions that drive the plot forward.
Cut his throat. Stop. Wait. I've changed my mind.
Just like protagonists. A campaign where you have to go to the 4 temples to gather the 4 orbs of the elements, or else the world explodes is fine, but that's a very static campaign. You can add a ticking clock if you want, but the disruption of the status quo is just a threat if the heroes don't succeed. It doesn't take place in the story itself. A campaign villain is constantly disrupting the status quo and going against what the heroes are trying to accomplish by generally existing and going about their evil little plans and being annoying. And this generates complexity and makes for a more dynamic story. And that's really exciting, go figure. It's also easy to forget this when you get into the macro planning of your story, but villains are characters. Characters have motivations, backstory, and inner world. They have wants and needs. Maybe they like puppies, maybe they have a weird sense of fashion, or they are scared of monkeys. They are characters. Adding a villain to your campaign is adding the only NPC whose importance to the plot is on par with that of the player characters. That's it. That's the only NPC for which you can do that. Find me about this in the comments. And guess what? Characters are extremely compelling. I don't even need to list them. I bet you are thinking right now of villains of stories that you found extremely compelling, that burrowed into your mind like little gross worms and made their home there for much of your formative years, and left far more of an impression than the protagonist of those stories. God, no, no, who let him out of his prison? Leave, leave! In the name of the Lord, I compel you, Vade Retro Satana. Imagine accessing that power in your own D&D game. That's sick. Here's the thing. You're running a game for people, and people are deeply compelled by a dynamic story where the status quo changes and by a character that they can latch onto, even if that character is directly going against their wishes and the way they latch onto them is by pure searing hatred. Pure searing hatred is a strong emotion, and that's something powerful you want to evoke in your players. Sure, stopping an asteroid from ping-ponging the world to death, or stopping a big Lovecraftian whatever from rising from the depths is a threat. That's certainly something that would be bad if it happened, but the players are not going to hate the asteroid or the Cthulhu thingy. That's not a thing to hate. The guy summoning the asteroid or the thing from the deep, however, that's somebody to hate, to understand, to have complicated feelings for. That's the drama, baby. And you know that here at Pointy Hat Industries, we're all about the drama. So cool. We know why we would be interested in adding a villain to our D&D campaign, but I can already hear you asking, okay Hat, how would you exactly go about making this villain you speak of? Well, I love being negative, so how about we first talk about what not to do? The most important thing to keep in mind about this process is that the villain kind of depends on the campaign, so I can see all of them sort of working depending on the campaign in question. That being said, I think there are definitely some things that can either go wrong easily if you're not careful, are not really suited for most campaigns, or don't really take advantage of having a villain in the first place. So let's get into those. First up, I gotta introduce y'all to a little concept I call the evil lamp. So you might have heard about the concept of the sexy lamp. Basically, if a female character in a story can be effectively replaced by a sexy lamp and the story remains basically the same, you might have a tinsy bit of a sexy lamp situation on your hands. The sexy lamp test, established by Kelly Sue DeConnick, is meant to assess if the female character in question has any agency in the story. As in, does she actually do anything at all, or is she just a storytelling device to pass around? I think this can be applied, weirdly enough, to some villains. Evil lamps are the sort of villains that just sit in their castle, the evil lair, underground cavern system, whatever, and just generally do absolutely nothing at all there. They might shed evil like a lamp sheds light, like them existing might somehow make the world worse, but in terms of agency, role in the story, specifically characterization, they could be replaced by an evil lamp and the story will remain basically the same. Cersei spends much of the last seasons of my dreaded nemesis late-stage Game of Thrones TV show as an evil lamp, which is made all the more annoying after seeing her be the best character in television for like 3 seasons. Sauron certainly feels like an evil lamp in the Lord of the Rings movies, where it's not even clear if he's the one issuing commands of his own armies. I wouldn't quite put Scar in The Lion King as an evil lamp, as he starts as a very proactive villain, you know, killing his brother, ensuring that the successor to the throne goes on sabbatical forever, but he does spend the rest of the movie after that just sitting on Pride Rock, and his evil makes the land go bad? The Lion King has some truly wild exceptionalist themes to it. Anyway, you get it. Evil lamp. Why is that bad? Well, you know how I said that villains are often active? The evil lamp sure isn't. They created a crapsack world and they have very much accomplished what they set out to do, so they are just not going to be out and about making sure that their evil deeds bear fruit. Secondly, most of these guys can easily end up feeling like non-characters. I feel like you can really feel this with Sauron. Yes, once again, I understand that Sauron was way more of a character in the Silmarillion. I am not talking about that. I'm talking about the movies, no, whatever that thing was during the Hobbit movies sure doesn't count. Many of these guys end up feeling like forces of nature rather than characters in their own right. We're one step above Asteroid that destroys the dinosaurs as a villain here. Once again, this is fine. I like all examples I named above. The reason why I caution against this is that if you felt like you wanted to add a villain to your campaign, this is a great way to not reap any of the benefits of that. Rime of the Frost Maiden had its own evil lamp. I don't really want to get into detail since, you know, spoilers, but she's not particularly compelling, which is fine. She was meant to be an evil lamp. But still, if you're putting a villain in your campaign and you go for this, you are basically foregoing 90% of what makes villains interesting. They won't feel like a character, and they won't move the plot forward themselves and break the status quo by being a dynamic part of the story. It's fine. Do this if you really want to concentrate on the world itself rather than any characters, but you still want a big, dumb, bombastic boss fight at the end. Okay, so that's evil lamps. Secondly, a thing to avoid is having the wrong scale of villainy for your campaign. This is harder to mess up, but I have seen it, and oh god, does it get bad. Contrary to your first instinct, go too big in villainy and your villain just ends up feeling like a caricature. If your villain spends their evenings starving orphans and making widows cry and destroying ecosystems and razing villages to the ground and then destroying the world as we know it before having dinner, I can guarantee you your players will mentally check out of that mess very fast. The villain might be theoretically scary in that they are very powerful, but your players will absolutely call your bluff on this because you will never unleash this god of death and destruction on them until they have at least a bit of a chance of either escaping or killing it. So you have written yourself into a corner. This guy literally cannot show up to torment your players, and the villain ends up feeling unrealistic, too evil to feel real. Conversely, go too small and your players are bound to outgrow them or just never actually feel threatened by them. You gotta find a sweet spot for the magnitude of your campaign. Let's get an example of this. Cruella de Vil, no, not that one, the good one.
Anita, die!
Yeah, that's the stuff. If we examine our scale of villainy as a whole, Cruella falls somewhat towards the bottom. Yes, she's not nice. She has some creative ideas as to what to do with puppies, which is akin to murder in my book, but we are not talking world-ending threat here, not even close. So why does she feel like such a good villain then? Well, because her level of villainy fits the scale of the film. 101 Dalmatians is a story about some very fertile dogs and their struggles with being born British. That's a small scale. The film needed a villain lower in the villainy scale to fit its story. Rasputin in Anastasia is a great example of a villain whose level of villainy does not fit the story in the slightest. Anastasia is not nearly as good as you remember it. Sorry. Keeping your level of villainy according to the story you're making at the table might mean making your villain grow in power along with the players, or have the villain start as powerful but somehow unable to do all that they want to do until they gather all the chaos emeralds or whatever. Or hell, maybe do start off small, have the players defeat what they thought was the villain, and have them find out that they were just the second in command to a much more dangerous actual villain. That's a really good way to keep interest high in very long campaigns. Maleficent in the original Kingdom Hearts is very much playing this role, and it works until, you know, Kingdom Hearts does this. And finally, since we're on the Disney train, we gotta talk about twist villains. Ugh. Since Frozen did this, we're seeing a trend, and it sure is getting stale. Twist villains, as their name implies, are villains that are not telegraphed to be villainous from the start. The fact that they are the villain is a big reveal. They are very in vogue right now. Disney refuses to do anything but this, selfishly depriving us of villain songs and cool character designs. As to how this pertains to D&D, twist villains are not inherently a bad idea, but I feel like if you're just now thinking about adding a villain to your campaign, or you tried before and it didn't work, maybe don't go for this one. I've tried these in D&D, and they are okay with campaigns focused on a mystery. Who is behind the X? Turns out, that guy was. I've been thinking of making a whole video about how to write mysteries in D&D because I truly feel it's one of the things that is the easiest to mess up, so sound off in the comments if you feel like you want that. But here's some advice as it pertains to villains. In order for the reveal of the twist villain to feel satisfying, you need to telegraph it. You need to make it possible for your players to guess who the person behind the X is. If you don't, then the reveal will absolutely 100% of the time fall completely flat. The whole point of the twist villain is the big payoff at the end of that reveal. That moment where your players start to tie all the loose threads together after you reveal who the villain is, and every piece of the puzzle falls into place. If you haven't telegraphed this at all, your players will just meet that reveal with a resounding okay. And let me tell you, that sure is not fun to go through for neither you nor them. But of course, if you do that and you have some true crime addicts as your players, they might just actually guess who the villain is before you intend to reveal them. And then you just have to sit there, hearing them explain to the rest of the group why they think that X is the bad guy, knowing that they are right. And then what? The knowledge that you were banking all of it in a ruined reveal is just sitting there, lingering over the table like an uncomfortable fart. And the magic of the reveal, while not totally ruined, is replaced by smugness. Get ready for some I knew it, I guessed it, called it, not fun. Plus, guessing this sort of thing in a 2-hour film hits very different than guessing this in a campaign that has to go for like 8 more 4-hour sessions. Basically, if you choose a twist villain, you are giving up all the emotional catharsis that your players would feel by having a clearly established villain that they can spend the whole campaign hating in exchange for the promise of a big reveal that could go very wrong very easily. Thread carefully. I would honestly steer clear of twist villains except for small arcs. If you really want to do this, run a murder mystery adventure while in the context of a long-running campaign to scratch that itch. And maybe wait for my video on that. But okay, we have gone through what not to do when making villains. So I think we're ready for the meat and potatoes. How exactly do we go about making them? Let's go. So if we review what I said before, we can very easily make a sort of baseline checklist that this villain can hit to work in a D&D campaign to its full potential. 1. The villain must be active. You want your villain to be an important player in the story, someone that is constantly making moves to advance their goals. This does not mean you don't get to start your campaign set in a world where the villain runs everything and is the source of all evil or whatever. Look at Strahd. Barovia is a hellhole of his own creation, but he's actively looking for something. If you know, you know. Having an active villain means that the campaign becomes sort of a dialogue, and the status quo changes constantly. Did you set up a thing where if the player finds the 4 Chaos Emeralds, they can stop the villain? Have the villain find the first one. Have the players find the first one, and then have the villain send someone after them to get it back. This is what you can access by having an active villain, an NPC that is trying their hardest to oppose the players, and a story that evolves and keeps them on their toes. That's an active villain. Number 2, the villain must be present. A good way to avoid the evil lamp is for your players to meet the villain. Have their presence not just felt, but be there physically. Have your players interact with your villain. Have the consequences of their actions clear for the party to see. Some of the coolest villains in fiction literally hang out with the party. You can find many excuses to do this. Maybe the villain is this nihilistic monster that is secretly hoping the party may actually pose a challenge to their god tier powers, and is content to let them grow in power so that the fight between the two might awaken something in them. I don't know, you obviously don't have to go for something exactly like this, but having the presence of the villain as a through line in your campaign will reap great results. Once again, Strahd is not just a spooky guy that stays in a castle. The players are literally meant to meet him several times during the campaign. The villain doesn't have to show up constantly, but their minions can show up. The right-hand men can come up to stop the party's plans. We're trying to avoid having them parked in their castle sipping wine so the party can completely forget about them. So have them be present. Number 3, the villain must be personal. This one is the trickiest, but it's also the one with the most payoff. You know the corny movie line, "Now it's personal." We want that. If the players show up somewhere and the villain has fucked up a bunch of stuff for friendly NPCs, that's sad and all, whatever. The players will most likely help them if they are not, bad people to play D&D with, but there's no personal pull to do so. Nothing is in it for them other than the vague, it's the right thing to do, and fake money. The way to avoid this is, of course, to personally connect your villains to your players. There are 1,000 ways to do this, and none of them are necessarily good or bad, or even mutually exclusive. So let's go over some of them. My personal favorite, and the one that reaps the greatest results in my book, is digging through the 25 pages of backstory your players gave you and ask yourself, where's the hook here that I can connect back to my villain? Now, let me be clear, you don't have to make absolutely everything about your players' backstories connected to a single villain. There's no better way to make something feel forced than doing this. A good way to mix it up is to give the villain its own little squad or second in commands, or at least give him what is often referred to as a dragon. No, not one of those. Well, I guess they could be one of those. Well, whatever, that's not the point. A dragon is the word for a villain's second in command. Think Darth Vader for Papa Poutine. Spoilers for a movie from the 70s that has absolutely entered the public consciousness to the point where the spoiler is a boomer meme at this point, I guess. Luke's backstory is not particularly connected to Poutine, but rather to Vader. Leia is the one more intrinsically connected to Palpatine. And she's even connected to Vader by, blood. And Han is there. As you can see, giving a villain a second in command, or several, gives you additional threads to pull and makes it easier to tie your players' motivations and backstories to the villain in question. Another great way to do this, I do this all the time, is to straight up tell your players what the setting is, who the villain is, and let them figure out how they are connected to that villain in character creation. I feel like people often forget about this option. I personally love it. I guess some might find this too restraining. Whatever, I disagree, but everyone is different. The traditional way of tying your players to the villain is for the villain to show up towards the beginning of the campaign and just off a player, and I hate this. Don't do this.
Get some help.
In fact, as a general rule, never ever show up to a session with the explicit intent to kill a player character, no matter how much you think the story would benefit from it. You are not writing a book. You are not writing anything, period. You are sitting down with your friends to create a story together. The PCs are not your characters to puppeteer around. You are giving them a framework from which to make their own decisions about their characters. The only way I can see this actually working is by talking with a player and offering their character death as a possibility and them agreeing. A slightly nicer way to do this is to have the big bad evil guy show up and almost kill them, but deciding not to do so at the last second. All in all, I think that tying the elements of the PC's backstory to the villain and their underlings, or presenting the players with the setting and the villain from the point of character creation, is the better way to go about this. Or maybe some of you in the comments have a different way to go about it. The goal is the same. Make the players feel personally motivated to defeat the villain. Okay, so we've gone through why including a villain might be a good idea for your campaign, we've gone through what we shouldn't do when making a D&D villain, and we've gone through what we should do. But talk is cheap, and my videos are very long. So how about we make a villain? Okay, so I know I've just said a whole bunch of times that your villain should fit your campaign. So what campaign are we making a villain for? Let's say that for this exercise, I'm making a long-term campaign with plenty of political intrigue. Just a whole bunch of big macro politics that the players have to keep in mind when making decisions, because I like that.
Is this our show?
And not yours.
Okay, instantly, my mind goes to the villain being the leader of a great political power. But this is D&D, so we have to put some spooky magic shit happening with that. I also want to show that a villain can have a reason for the villainy while still being very much a villain. So let's add that to the mix. Okay, we have our starting point, let's go make a villain. The country of Navaria was always surrounded by titans. Compared to all of its neighbors, Navaria was smaller, poorer, and with basically no military might to speak of. Most Navarans belonged to clans with wildly different cultures, among whom there was constant infighting for land and resources, some ending in all-out war. This kept the country separated, the only unifying thread being the Navaran royal family, an institution to which all clan leaders were supposed to answer to. But the Navaran king was the leader of the country only in name. He was kind, merciful, and weak, and the clan leaders challenged or ignored him without repercussion. The queen, who married the king to help her father, one of the clan leaders, grew to resent her husband and his incompetence, and so she raised her son, the prince, to be the perfect heir to the throne. The prince was made to travel to neighboring countries as soon as he was able to talk, visiting different royal families and heads of state. He was sent to the best foreign schools, squired for famous knights, and learned everything he could ever learn to be a better king than his father. The queen made sure that he understood the precarious state of Navaria, how all their neighbors were stronger, fiercer, and had better leaders. The children of other states laughed at the state of the prince's homeland, or felt pity for him because of where he came from, or made jokes about his father. The prince grew up simultaneously hating his country and wishing nothing more than to change it, to make Navaria a nation that could stand among all others with pride. Nobody other than the queen knows exactly what happened during his stay abroad, but the prince would stay late at night, looking for odd books that talked about forbidden arcane rituals. Some say that one of those late nights he made contact with something outside of this realm, although nobody has ever been able to prove that such a thing ever happened. The prince came back to Navaria a grown man, changed in some way that was hard to ascertain but plain to see. He immediately deposed his father of the throne and got to work making his own vision of Navaria a reality through whatever means necessary. With the help of his mother's clan and the royal family, he squashed the second largest clan in Navaria and forced the others to bend the knee to him. The clan leaders that refused were unceremoniously put to the sword. Next, he set out to wipe every difference between the former clans. The prince dreamed of a unified Navaran cultural identity, and so he erased every tradition, every religion, every language, every difference between the different people of Navaria. You would think that faced with this tyranny, the people of Navaria would rise against their new tyrant prince, but the prince ensured that they couldn't. Right as he rose to power, something rose alongside him. A new plague unlike anything seen before. Monsters that could not be defeated by conventional means, and all those that fell to them would turn into those same monsters in return. Navarans called these monsters angels because of their celestial appearance. Nobody knew how to stop them. Nobody, except for the prince and his forces. The prince said that a new god spoke to him and gave him the power to destroy these monsters. Only a unified Navaria, united under the prince's banner, and the new religion to this mysterious god represented by the prince himself could withstand the attacks of these angels. Most of the people of Navaria readily accepted the new rule, and those that didn't were cast aside the walls of the new cities, where they would fall to the angels and join their forces. Before long, the face of the country had changed completely. Navaria went from a home to diverse practices, languages, cultures, rulers, and people to a homogeneous whole, unified under one banner, one religion, and one ruler. Many embraced this new Navaria.
while others work in the shadows to keep the old ways alive and fight against the despotic rule of the prince. But the prince's ambitions don't end at the borders of his country. The threat of these angels that suspiciously arose as he did is now extending from Novaria to neighboring countries, and the prince is ready to help his neighbors fight this new threat, if they bend the knee to the Novarian crown.
That's cool, I think. Imagine the campaign you can play with that villain. It doesn't take a genius to see that the prince is behind these angels, or at least connected to them. How did he manage that? What are they? What are the angels? How are the old clan leaders taking to this new rule? Did some join the resistance? Imagine how easy it would be to tie the PCs to this villain to get that personal connection to the prince. A PC could be an old clan leader trying to defeat the prince and preserve their culture from being completely wiped out by the new rule. Or the daughter of an old clan leader that was set to inherit the title of leader of her clan. All those would lead to great sources of personal conflict directly tied to the villain. You also get plenty of fun mysteries for your players to solve, like what exactly are the angels and what is their connection to the prince. The prince is clearly an active villain, so you could keep your campaign to Novaria and have it be about the Navarian resistance, or it could start that way and then evolve to involve the neighboring countries and how they deal with the angel threat. Of course, the prince as a villain has been specifically made to fit a political intrigue-focused campaign, but I hope you can see how I use the principles outlined in this video to make this guy, so you can go about making your own villain that fits your campaign. Or hell, use this one as a springboard. I don't care, I literally do these so y'all use them. It's just a shame that all this info is just in video form. You don't have like a nice little doc with everything condensed there so you can use it in your dastardly DM schemes. Except you do, because I made it, and it's in the description of this very video for completely free. So go out there, practice your best maniacal laugh, and curb stomp your players with your fresh new disconcertingly sexy villain. And that's it. That's the villain video. You did it. You made it to the end. Congrats. Tip of the hat is always an undertaking writing-wise, and they take like 10 times longer to write, so I hope you like this one. Of course, I love villains. I love Disney villains specifically. So this one was on the list since I started this series. I do think they add a whole lot to your story if you do them right, but I also think they're easy to mess up, so I hope this helps. If it does, let me know. Also, soon enough, it's gonna be like 1 year since we started all of this. 1 year since the channel came to be. Somehow, we're still not even 1 year old. We're still babies. If you want to contribute to raise this baby and to the baby shower, show the channel to your friend, to your mom, to your dad, to your gas station clerk. So thank you everybody that has shared the videos and stuff. Still working on that 100K special. I can assure you it's coming. It's just taking a long time because I wanted to make it good. Let's hope I don't get to 200 before that. I don't think I will, but that would be funny. All right, make sure to wash any fruits and vegetables before eating them. My mom keeps telling me a girl died from eating strawberries without washing them. It's like one of those things that moms say that just like imprints into your brain forever, and now you always think about it. Okay, I'm leaving. Bye. Love you. Mwah.
I love you all. You're beautiful. And never forget that everyone is a princess.